Welcome to part 11 of the Firmament series, where we'll take a little look at our current cosmology and how could we have a firmament with what we know about our current cosmology, and that's the big question. So this is, if you've made it this far through the first 10 parts, you're going to say, if you haven't blown me off already, you're going to ask the question of, well, how does this make sense with what we already know of the universe? So we're going to take just a little deep dive into that. So let's contrast heliocentric versus geocentric. So I know I've brought that up multiple times, but we have to understand, what do you actually believe? So when you um, look at, the current cosmology that you've grown with since you were a young child and what you learned about in school, let's just break that down and understand exactly what that entails. So the heliocentric model says, now you may not believe this, but if you say, I hold to the heliocentric model itself, that says that there were stars before there was Earth. That's what that says. But it also says that the sun is at the center with all planets and Earth circling the sun, and that's what most people believe. That's what I believe for most of my life. What you may not have realized is that it does rely on the Big Bang Theory. So if you do not have the Big Bang Theory, then the heliocentric model can't take place. Now the argument would be, God was the Big Bang. God said, let there be, and boom, everything kind of exploded into existence. And that's possible, for sure. There's some problems with that, but we'll get into that. And the heliocentric model was birthed around 1540. A lot of people say that we've known about this model for a very long time, but that's just objectively not very true. The heliocentric model was birthed around this time. So now let's contrast that to the geocentric model of the universe. So the geocentric model says that the sun, moon, and the stars circle the Earth. Now, whether they be further away or more intimate and close is, either one, as long as Earth is at the center and everything's going around it. Geocentric model says Earth doesn't spin and is at the center of all things. So you can't have a spinning Earth and a geocentric model at the same time. If there was a Big Bang, like there's claimed, then the geocentrism can't be true. So you can't have both. You can't have a Big Bang and a central Earth to all things. And this was the prevailing view from ancient cultures until about the 1700s. So again, I keep bringing up AI, but I gave AI this prompt. I said, in our current model, so talking about our heliocentric model, that is the scientific consensus of the day, I said, being a human living on Earth's surface, how would we even know the difference between this hypothetical cosmology and our current real-world cosmology? So the cosmology in which I prompted the AI to think about hypothetically would be a geocentric Earth. So the answer that AI gave me says, in our current model, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for a human living on Earth's surface to definitively know the difference between our hypothetical cosmology, which I gave it would be the geocentric cosmology, and the real world one without divine revelation or highly specialized observations. So the big one here is daily celestial motions. Artificial intelligence says, and I know artificial intelligence isn't the be-all, end-all of anything. I just think it's interesting when you put it through this thought machine that it gives you these types of answers. It says the apparent daily rising and setting of the sun, moon, and stars can be explained by either a rotating Earth or a rotating firmament or celestial bodies. Therefore, this observation alone would not be able to distinguish between the two models. Now, we're told that it's the movement of the celestial bodies is how we know we're spinning. But what we're going to find out here in a little bit, that it's not really as cut and dry as you may think it is. I want to deviate just a little bit. So when we talk about heliocentric, we're talking about sun at the center of all things. Okay? So let's just look at the interesting, let's just say for devil's advocate, just for kicks and giggles, that heliocentrism is sun worship. Okay, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying if you believe in the heliocentric model that you're worshiping the sun. But let's look at some of these other cultures and what the Bible says about sun worship in general. 2 Kings 23:5. And he deposed the priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to make offerings in the high places at the cities of Judah and around Jerusalem. Those who have also burned incense to Baal, to the sun and the moon and the constellations and all the hosts of heaven. 2 Kings 23:11, the first part of that verse. And he removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun. 2 Chronicles 34:4. They broke down the altars of Baals in his presence. The sun images that were high above them he hewed down. The Asherim and the graven images and the molten images he broke into pieces and made dust of them and strew it on the graves of those who sacrificed to them. So what we see is that the sun images are associated with Baal. Right there. 2 Chronicles 34:7. He broke down the altars of Asherim and beat the graven images into powder and hewed down all the sun images throughout all the land of Israel. So these sun images are very front and center of pagan worship. It says, then he returned to Jerusalem. So Asherim, we'll see here, is going to be kind of the female counterpart to Baal, and that'll be important here in a second. Isaiah 17:8. And they will not look to the idolatrous altars, the work of their hands, neither will they have respect for what their fingers have made, either the Asherim, the symbols of the goddess of Asherah, or the sun images. So those Asherims are those poles, like Asher poles, that you hear about in the Bible. Next verse, Isaiah 27:9, second part of that, it says, so that the Asherim and the sun images shall not remain standing or rise again. Ezekiel 6:4, and your altars shall be made desolate, and your sun pillars shall be broken to pieces, and I will cast down your slain before your idols. Ezekiel 6:6, in all your dwelling places the city shall be laid waste, and the high places shall be made desolate, that your altars may bear their guilt and be laid waste and made desolate. Your idols may be broken and destroyed. Your sun images may be hewed down, and your handiworks may be wiped away and blotted out. Ezekiel 8:16, the second part of that verse, and they were bowing themselves toward the east and worshiping the sun. Interesting. Hosea 4:19, the resistless wind of God's wrath has bound up Israel in the wings or skirts, and in captivity they and their altars shall be put to shame because of their sacrifices to calves, to sun, moon, stars, and to heathen gods. So I'm in the firm belief that the calf is actually like kind of Moloch, which is the same as Baal. I think that's what I think they were actually worshiping Baal in the desert, in the wilderness with the golden calf. Could be wrong, but that's just my opinion. Romans 1:20, for ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through his workmanship, so that they are without excuse and without defense. So God's creation is supposed to draw you to him. There should be no excuse for not believing in an eternal God. But instead, we worship the created things. So the sun is not the center of the creation narrative. Now, whether or not you want to believe it's the center of the universe or the center of our galaxy or whatever, you have to admit that the sun is not the center of the creation narrative. It's not even there till day 4. It's just called a great light that gets put to serve the earth. Its purpose is to give light on the earth, to separate day from night, to tell different times and seasons, help us keep time. All that, those celestial bodies are to serve the earth, and that's what we get from the creation narrative. And like I said, whether or not you want to equate that to geocentrism versus heliocentrism, I'll let you interpret that for yourself. But you at least have to admit it's not the center of the creation narrative. Earth is. There's a lot of false religion festivals that are held on solstices to honor the sun god. And this includes what we think of Christmas. That's all stemmed from Babylon. So all false religions and all false gods stem out of Babylon. Now, what do we get from Babylon? What else do we get from Babylon? Well, we get Nimrod. And then there's a lot of links to Baal, to Ra Osiris, to Moloch, and those are all also associated with worshiping the sun. And then you have Semiramis, who is his wife, his female counterpart, and she's also related to Asherah, Isis, and Ishtar. So all of these kind of counterparts to these other gods as well. And because Semiramis was always linked to being Baal's wife. And, it just makes you wonder if after the confusion of languages at the Tower of Babel, if these 70 different people groups don't go out and worship Nimrod by different names and, slightly skew them over time and things like that. But if it's a wonder if this, quote unquote, first Antichrist isn't still being, essentially worshipped today. It's just interesting. So what did the early church fathers have to say about heliocentrism versus geocentrism? So let's just get a couple early quotes here. Martin Luther in 1539 says, "There is talk of a new astrologer, Nicholas Copernicus, who wants to prove that the earth moves and goes around instead of the sky, the sun, and the moon. Just as if somebody were moving in a carriage or ship might hold that he was sitting still at rest while the earth and the trees walked and moved. But that is how things are nowadays. When a man wishes to be clever, he must invent something special. And the way he does it must needs to be the best. The fool wants to turn the whole art of astronomy upside down. However, as Holy Scripture tells us, so did Joshua bid the sun to stand still and not the earth." And then John Calvin says, "Who will venture to place the authority of Copernicus above that of the Holy Spirit?" Saint Aphrahat the Persian, "For the sun in 12 hours circles around, from the east unto the west, and when he has accomplished his course, his light is hidden in the nighttime, and the night is not disturbed by his power. And in the hours of the night, the sun turns round in his rapid course, and turning round begins to run in his accustomed path." That's from Demonstrations 24. So he says something similar to what David says in Psalm 19. He says that the sun is like a strong man running his race, running his course, and he comes back again. John Chrysostom, "For he had not only made it, but proved also that when it was made, it should carry on its operations, not permitting it to be all immovable, nor commanding it to be all in a state of motion. The heaven, for instance, hath remained immovable, according to as the prophet says, He placed the heaven as a vault, and stretched it out as a tent over the earth. But on the other hand, the sun, with the rest of the stars, runs on his course through every day. And again, the earth is fixed, but the waters are continually in motion, and not the waters only, but the clouds, and the frequent and successive showers which return at their proper season." That's from Homilies to Antioch, Homily 12. Gregory of Nicaea, "The vault of heaven prolongs itself so uninterruptedly that it encircles all things within itself, and that the earth and its surroundings are poised in the middle, and that the motion of all the revolving bodies is round this fixed and solid center." That's from the writings on the soul and resurrection. And Athenagoras of Athens, "To him is for us to know who stretched out and vaulted the heavens and fixed the earth in its place like a center." And this is from Why the Christians Do Not Offer Sacrifices, chapter 13. Now, there was a million I could choose from. So prior to the conversion of everybody to the heliocentric model in the 1700s, all the early church fathers and reformers believed in a geocentric earth that was fixed, and it was the heavens that rotated around. But for time's sake, I only added a few here because we could be here forever reading those quotes. But I encourage you to find those yourself. Now, I will admit, they're not easy to find. It's not easy to find, and that should be a red flag within itself. So, is the Earth moving? That's the question, right? Is the Earth moving? So let's see if we can find some Bible verses here. 1 Chronicles 16:30. Tremble reverently before him, all the earth. The world is firmly established, it will not be moved. Psalm 93:1. The Lord reigns, he is clothed with majesty and splendor. The Lord has clothed and encircled himself with strength. The world is firmly established, it cannot be moved. Psalm 96:10. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Indeed, the world is firmly and securely established, it shall not be moved. He will judge and rule the people with fairness. Psalm 104:5. He established the earth on its foundations so that it will not be moved forever and ever. Zechariah 1:11. And they answered the angel of the Lord who stood among the myrtle trees and said, We have walked to and fro throughout the earth, and behold, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. And there's about 25 verses about the earth being laid on its foundations. So the implication when you talk about being laid on foundations is that it's strong, steady, secure, and immovable, because that's why you lay something on a firm foundation. So you can say that some of these may be taken out of context, and I would definitely agree with that. Probably Zechariah 1:11 would be the most liable to be kind of axed from there. But there's a couple of those that will just definitely make you kind of question, did he really mean that? Or I'm sure he didn't mean that, but you can definitely say that there's some of those you at least say, okay, if you just take that one verse, you could probably definitely think that, right? So, or are the luminaries moving? So, let's find out. Let's see what the Bible says. So, over 60 verses about the luminaries in motion, and there's 0 that declare the earth to be in motion. So we have the sun and moon stopping in Joshua 10. We have Ecclesiastes 1:5. Also the sun rises and the sun sets and hurries to the place where it rises again. You have Psalm 19:5 and 6, which as a bridegroom coming out of its chamber, speaking of the sun, and it rejoices as a strong man to run his course. Its going forth is from the end of heavens, and its circuit, that means the circle, to the ends of it, and nothing, yes, no one, is hidden from the heat of it. Okay, this isn't the Bible, so I apologize, but Josephus, Book 1, Chapter 1, 31b, says, On the fourth day he adorned the heaven with the sun, the moon, and the other stars, and he appointed them their motions and courses, meaning that they are the ones that are moving. Isaiah 38:8, this is speaking of the sundial of Ahaz. Behold, I will bring the shadow of the degrees which have gone down in the sundial of Ahaz 10 degrees backward. So the sun returned 10 degrees by which degrees it had gone down, meaning that either the sun retreated in its position, or you could say the earth kind of spun backwards and spun forwards again. But it's talking about the sun being in motion there. In Habakkuk 3:11, the sun and moon stood still in their habitation. And at the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. And then this is not the Bible either, but this is just talking about the book of Enoch, chapter 72 to 79. So obviously I'm not going to include 5 chapters here, but it speaks in great detail about the luminaries having their paths and orbits around a stationary earth, as well as the sun and moon being the exact same size. And that's what we observe. Now the explanation is that one is 400 times bigger and coincidentally 400 times further away, and God could do that if he wants, makes it kind of perfect. But or they're just, the two great lights are the two great lights, and they're kind of opposite of each other, and they're the same size. And one emits cold light, one emits hot light. One's bright, or one shines, one glows, and one rules the day and one rules the night. So, but then you tell me this is a no-brainer. This is why the Bible is untrustworthy and Christians are stupid, because we know the earth is moving. It's a proven fact. And to think otherwise, you're an idiot, right? We know the earth is moving. So, I mean, I'm surprised you made it this far in the in the video series. We know it's moving. So what the heck is the problem? We know it is. Physicist George F.R. Ellis, this is referring to geocentrism in his quote, "You can only exclude it on philosophical grounds," talking about geocentrism. "What I want to bring into the open is the fact that we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that." And you're going to see this come up again, but what he's saying is, when picking and choosing between analyzing the data that they find in a geocentric way versus a heliocentric way, they are only choosing the heliocentric model based on philosophical grounds, meaning that you cannot have geocentrism and have a Big Bang. And the Big Bang is needed to show that something could happen without God. So to have Earth at a very specific and set location, center to all the universe, means that there's probably some design in that, and that means we're special. And they say, well, that can't be, so it must be that the Earth is moving. Albert Einstein, "I have come to believe that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment." Physicist Albert Michelson, this conclusion about they ran a test, the Michelson-Morley test. Well, they were looking at this thing called the ether, but essentially what they found was the Earth wasn't moving. They couldn't detect it. It says this conclusion directly contradicts the explanation, which presupposes that the Earth moves. Uh, Michikaku, he's a Japanese-American physicist and science communicator. He said that in cosmology, theory and experiment are off by a factor of 10 to the 120th, which is a 1 with 120 zeros after it. Kaku described this as the largest mismatch between theory and experiment in the history of science. Okay, so a 1 with 120 zeros after it. That's how far they're off with what they can experiment and what their theories are. That's a big problem. That's an incomprehensible number. So that means that something has to be off here with cosmology because they can't figure it out. So what they do and what you'll find out is they keep coming out with more theories, and this is where you get dark matter, and this is where you get multiverse theories and all this different stuff, because they're like, well, we need to find something to bridge, to save our previous theory, and then they just come up with more theories. And it's just theory after theory after theory, and it's so far gone that it's off by a factor of 10 to the 120th. I don't need, just write a 1 and then write 120 zeros after it. That's the number. I mean, there's probably not even enough atoms in the universe to make that number. It's so large, and that's how far they're off. Like, something is wrong, obviously, with your theories. And this was from various Chinese astronomers wrote in the Times London in August 20th, 1872. Now remember, the heliocentric model wasn't widely accepted until the 1700s, but even then, look, this is close to the 1900s, and it says, "We have better philosophers and men of higher intelligence than any of you have ever been able to produce. You tell us that the earth goes round the sun, when we know by our senses that it does not. If you won't use your eyes and believe what you see, you must be deaf to all teaching and instruction, and we will have nothing to do with you." So they wrote this in the Times of London in 1872. But we've known that the Earth has been moving forever and ever, in the ancient Greeks and all this different stuff, right? But it's not so. It was not so necessarily widespread. Astrophysicist Y.P. Varshini, "It is shown that the cosmological interpretation of the red shift in the spectra of quasars leads to yet another paradoxical event, namely that the Earth is the center of the universe." Physicist Arthur Eddington, "There was just one alternative. The Earth's true velocity through space might happen to have been nil," and that means nothing. Physicist Henry Poincaré, "A great deal of research has been carried out concerning the influence of the Earth's movement. The results were always negative." But they still believe that we're moving anyways, because you can't have an Earth at the center of all things. It has to be moving because it has to be the heliocentric model, because there has to be a Big Bang, because there has to be an explanation of creation that does not involve an all-knowing creator. Albert Einstein. To question whether or not the motion of the Earth in space can be made perceptible in terrestrial experiments, we have already remarked that all attempts of this nature led to a negative result. Before the theory of relativity was put forward, it was difficult to become reconciled to this negative result. So here's what happens. We're going to talk about theory of relativity a little bit later with Einstein, but this is what happens. They keep coming to this conclusion with all of these experiments that the Earth isn't moving. And they say, well, we know that can't be, and like I said, it's based on philosophical terms, why they don't believe that. But he says, this can't be, therefore, I need to create something to reconcile us with these negative results. That's what he said. Before the theory of relativity was put forth, it was difficult to become reconciled to this negative result. But once you come up with the theory of relativity, now it's like, okay, now we know why, even though every instrument, every experiment, all of our senses tell us we're not moving, now we can say that we are based on the theory of relativity, and you can't prove it otherwise because you say everything's relative. Physicist Julian B. Barbour. This, even now, 3.5 centuries after Galileo, and Galileo's observations were kind of the start of the heliocentric model, even though Copernicus thought it up. He says, it is still remarkably difficult to say categorically whether the Earth moves. So they can't tell. From Bernard Jaffe or Jaff, or however you pronounce that, it says, Michelson and the speed of light in 1960. The data were almost unbelievable. There was only one other possible conclusion to draw, that the Earth was at rest. Physicist James Coleman. The easiest explanation was that the Earth was fixed in the ether and that everything else in the universe moved with respect to the Earth and the ether. Such an idea was not considered seriously, since it would mean in effect that our Earth occupied the omnipotent position in the universe, with all other heavenly bodies paying homage by moving around it. So listen to what he's saying. Everything, the easiest explanation for things was that the Earth is fixed. But they said, there's no way. That's not considered that. We're not taking that seriously. That means we're at the center of all things. We're in an omnipotent position. The heavenly bodies are paying homage to us and serving us and moving around us. That can't be. It has to be the other way. Astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle. We know that the difference between a heliocentric theory and a geocentric theory is one of relative motion only. So therefore, so just to stop that quote for a second, that's when we get back to Albert Einstein. The only difference you can think up of, or the only difference between them, is relative motion theory, the theory of relative motion. It says, and a geocentric theory is one of relative motion only, in that such a difference has no physical significance. Today, we cannot say that the Copernican theory is right and the Ptolemaic theory is wrong, and Ptolemaic is geocentric, in any meaningful sense. So it's kind of like saying, like, oh, your eyes are open, but we know it's closed because of this paradoxical theory that I'm thinking of. Or, I know you're seeing, this light in your bedroom, but that light isn't really there, it's an illusion. And it's like, how are you going to prove that wrong? Those are probably horrible examples, but with the theory of relativity, it's just a band-aid that it's just like the magic genie that fixes everything. And even though you can't prove anything, we just say, oh, well, I know that we can't feel any motion. I know that even though we're wobbling back and forth and tilting back and forth like a little bobblehead, and we're spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, and we're going around the sun at 66,000 miles per hour, and then we're chasing the sun at 600,000 miles per hour, and we're speeding up and slowing down because as we're chasing the sun in a direction, we have to speed up in order to pass it and then go around it without it catching back up to us. So we have to accelerate and decelerate. or we have to have positive acceleration, negative acceleration, and those are all changes in speed and velocity. So we can't detect that either on Earth. We can't detect that with any type of experiment. All we can see is all the data that we see with stuff moving in our sky could be true for either a geocentric fixed Earth where everything moves around it, or it could be explained with the heliocentric model. But what I'm saying is, like, either way you look at that, either one of those could be right. You can't necessarily prove one or the other. Physicist Wolfgang Pauli. The failure of many attempts to measure terrestrially any effect of the Earth's motion. So they keep admitting that there's no way you can measure it. Historian Lincoln Barnett. We can't feel our motion through space, nor has any physical experiment ever proved that the Earth is actually in motion. It's only based on philosophy that there isn't a God. Physicist Bernard Cohen. There is no planetary observation by which we on Earth can prove that the Earth is moving in an orbit around the Sun. Physicist Stephen Hawking. And listen, I don't trust these guys as far as I can throw them. So you're going to hear me harp on some of these guys later for what they say. Like, you really want to trust this person? But it doesn't mean that they can't have true quotes either. So Stephen Hawking says, so which is real, the Ptolemaic, and that's geocentric, or Copernican, that's heliocentric? So which is real, the Ptolemaic or Copernican system? Although it is not uncommon for people to say that Copernicus proved Ptolemy wrong, that is not true. One can use either picture as a model of the universe, for our observations of the heavens can be explained by assuming either the Earth or the Sun to be at rest. Physicist Dennis Sciama. Whether the Earth rotates once a day from west to east, as Copernicus taught, or the heavens revolve once a day from east to west, as his predecessors believed, the observable phenomena will be exactly the same. This shows a defect in Newtonian dynamics, since an empirical science ought not to contain a metaphysical assumption, which can never be proved or disproved by observation. So all theories are being based on something that you can't actually prove. So then you go from empirical science now to metaphysical assumptions, and you're going to build all your theories around metaphysical assumptions versus actual provable science. Physicist Richard Wolfson. What's the conclusion from the Michelson-Morley experiment? Now remember, they were trying to test if there was ether or not, and what they discovered was, it says the implication is that the Earth is not moving. Physicist Neville Thomas Jones. We feel no motion of the world on which we all live. Furthermore, no experiment in all physics has ever demonstrated that the world moves around the sun or that it rotates on an axis. So whether it's a spin or a orbit around the sun, it says can't prove it. Edwin Hubble, you know this guy, Hubble telescope. Listen to what he says. Such a condition, geocentrism, would imply that we occupy a unique position in the universe. This hypothesis cannot be disproved, but it is unwelcome. Let me say that again. This hypothesis cannot be disproved, but it is unwelcome. Therefore, we disregard this possibility. So because it's unwelcomed, we're going to throw it out. The unwelcome position of a favored location must be avoided at all costs. Such a favored position is intolerable. Therefore, in order to restore homogeneity and to escape the horror of a unique position, the horror of a unique position, how dare us be created by an all-loving, all-powerful God that places us in the center of all things? Now, this doesn't prove geocentrism either. What this proves is that geocentrism is just as probable as heliocentrism. That's what it's saying. I mean, it makes a better case for geocentrism because all the terrestrial experiments say that you can't measure the movement of the Earth when we should be able to. But now, when Einstein comes up with this theory, not provable theory of relativity, now that's like the game genie. That's like the cheat code. Now it's like, well, theory of relativity. You're like, well, nothing we find says that we're moving, and we can't prove it. And there's another explanation for some of these celestial movements that we see. Um, you know, we only see one side of the moon ever. It's supposed to be spinning, but we only see the same thing all the time. So, it's because we're in a relativity. Everything's relative. Oh, okay, that proves it, or that answers it. So you don't question anything anymore. The Michelson-Morley experiment showed no motion of the Earth. Foucault's pendulum has been debunked. It has a lot of problems. That's what they say proves the spin. So I was messing with AI again, and I said, can you tell me the concrete evidence, concrete proofs that the Earth is spinning? And it gave me like a few things, in which I say, and one of them was Foucault's pendulum, and I said, well, hasn't that been debunked? And it says, no, it hasn't been debunked. You gotta, AI is, sometimes you have to teach it. And I said, well, aren't there very significant problems with Foucault's pendulum? And then it eventually admits that, yes, there are lots of problems with it, and you can't take it as proof. And then it said, concrete proof is that we see luminaries moving in the sky. And I said, well, isn't that possible also with a geocentric Earth? And they said, yes, you're correct. And I said, why are you giving me these things as concrete proofs that the Earth is spinning when they're not concrete proofs and can be proven otherwise? So by the end of me talking to this AI, it then admits that there is no concrete proof for it. But what happens is you take these things and you're told that they're concrete proof of it, and that's what you've grown up learning in school. So you just trust, and why wouldn't you? You just trust what you're told because it's science. But there's a that's like saying I see fire trucks at the fire. Every time I see a fire, I see fire trucks. Therefore, fire trucks cause fires. You know what I mean? It's like you're using you're taking the evidence and you're misinterpreting it, or potentially misinterpreting it. You can't prove that. Airy's failure showed no motion of the Earth. Airy's failure was another experiment that they used with water and lenses of telescopes. Showed no motion. Every repeat experiment and iteration of these experiments, which have been replicated even somewhat recently, have failed to show any movement of the Earth, even with our high-tech technology today. They're all been false. Planetariums that we use for teaching and navigation and are all based on immovable geocentric systems. There's this thing called the Antikythera mechanism. They found this little, it's like they said, this world's first computer used for navigation. That was based on geocentric systems. All of our navigation is based on geocentric systems. So, watch this documentary called The Principle. So I had to buy it. It's only a few bucks on like Prime, but that talks about the geocentric universe. And I don't necessarily say that everything in there is correct, but like there's a couple things that I definitely don't necessarily agree with still. I could be right or wrong. I'm not saying I am, and I'm not saying everything the principle says is true, but what it does is it makes the case that you can't prove the heliocentric model, and that Earth, all the data, all the experiments are showing that Earth is at the center of all things. So when they examine cosmic radiation the background of cosmic radiation, and they get that data, there's this axis where everything points back to the Earth evenly, as if it's at the center, and they call that the axis of evil because it shows that Earth is at the center. So it's a big problem for astrophysicists today. They literally think like Hubble, all these guys. It's evil. It's evil to think that we could be at the center of all things. But where did God put us? Just think about like if Earth is his masterpiece and all this different stuff and everything's placed around it, like doesn't that sound geocentric? I'm not saying that's proof of that, but wouldn't it be like God to put his creation that he hand carved and spoken to existence at the center of all things? I don't know. It's like there's no proof, but we know without a shadow of a doubt that the Earth revolves around the sun and spins, and to say otherwise, you're an uneducated moron. And this is where we're at. This is where we're at today. If you mention one thing and be like, I don't know if the Earth is actually spinning, everyone looks at you like you're a moron. But do you want me to go back to all those physicists saying, well, we can't really tell. We don't really know. We just believe it because to say we're at the center of all things means there's an all-knowing creator. So there's no proof. And the only proof we have is opposite to what they say, that the Earth is at rest. But yet we can't allow it because that means we're special. And if we aren't moving, then there isn't a Big Bang. Because the heliocentric model relies on us spinning and orbiting, and it relies on a Big Bang. And if there isn't a Big Bang, then how did we get here without a God? That's what it all comes back to. So why is this important? It's a fallacy to assume we have everything perfectly explained in our current cosmology. We don't. We don't have everything explained. And it is simply propaganda if you're being told this. Just the same way that they can't prove whether we're geocentric or heliocentric, but they act as if it is, and you get taught as if it is, and there's no teaching of the alternative and statistically just as likely or just as possible scenario. You're not told any of this. Astrophysicist Pavel Krupa says, the existence of exotic dark matter particles outside the standard model of particle physics constitutes a central hypothesis of the current standard model of cosmology. Using a wide range of observational data, I outline why this hypothesis cannot be correct for the real universe. So this guy's debunking this stuff called dark matter. Okay? So why is dark matter important? So he also argues that there is no way Newtonian explanations of the universe can be correct, as only 4% of the universe can actually be explained by Newtonian physics. Only 4%. The remaining 96% is said to be dark matter, which is unobservable. It's just theorized that something is there to take up the other 90, to explain the other 96% of things in the universe. So you have Newtonian physics, which we based everything around. Now, I'm not saying things like, force and leverage and all that. Like, I'm not saying this stuff doesn't exist. But when we talk about Newtonian physics and gravity on a cosmological scale, it doesn't work. It's only a 4% works. So there's a big problem. Now, this guy, astrophysicist Pavel Krupa, he's saying that, hey, I'm going to tell you right now that dark matter is bull. It's not real. So the apparent alignment in the cosmic microwave background is in one particular direction through space is called evil. And this is what we talked about, that axis of evil, because it undermines our ideas about a standard cosmological model. The Copernican principle seems to be in jeopardy. Now, this is astrophysicist Ashok K. Singhal. He says that because the cosmic microwave background says that everything is equally distributed away from Earth, meaning Earth is at the center of all things, then the Copernican model can't be true. So they call it evil. That's why they call it evil. Pavel and many other astrophysicists have discovered that there's been a falsification of dark matter in order to make the current cosmology work. So it's like it's like an algebra problem. You have one variable, so you switch one variable and you plug in the numbers that make it work for you. And that's what they keep doing. They're like, okay, how can we make up a math problem to make this work in our favor? And then they create a theory out of it. And if you're off by, 1 to the 120th power or 10 to the 120th power, it's like, that's a big problem. If you only can explain 4% of the universe, maybe you need to change your model. But we don't do that. We keep trying to just add stuff on there. Now we get to where we have multiverses to try to explain things. Our current theory of gravity, which is supposed to explain this movement of the celestial bodies, needs there to be dark matter in order for it to work. a spinning Earth needs our current theory of gravity. So if the current theory of gravity, you can't have a spinning Earth without our current theory of Newtonian gravity and how they operate with celestial bodies. And that theory of gravity needs dark matter. If dark matter is essentially being made up and falsified, then there can't be a spinning Earth, and it cannot revolve around the sun because it just doesn't work that way. So again, I asked Google AI, I said, Newtonian gravity needed, this is my exact question, this is a quote, Newtonian gravity needed relativity in order to continue using it in science theory, did it not? The answer is yes, you're essentially correct. Newtonian gravity in its original form reached a point where it was demonstrably insufficient to explain certain observed phenomena. Relativity became necessary to advance our scientific understanding of gravity. I said, okay. So Newtonian gravity needed relativity. And the same thing, that's why the Michelson-Morley experiment needed, or said the Earth didn't move, so Einstein needed to create relativity in order to keep things going with that current theory. So my next question to AI was, if dark matter does not exist, so let's pretend, if dark matter does not exist, which these astrophysicists like Pavel are starting to find out, then the theory of relativity faces major problems, does it not? So now Einstein's theory of relativity needs dark matter. So not only does the theory of gravity need dark matter, but relativity needs dark matter. And this is what AI said. You are right to point out the significant implications for general relativity if dark matter does not exist. If dark matter is proven not to exist, it would indeed create major problems for our current understanding of gravity and cosmology. Then I asked for proof that the Earth is spinning and gave me a few answers, which weren't actually concrete proof, and I kind of talked about this earlier, but it gave me things like snipers calculating for the Coriolis effect, which is the spin. And I said, and I challenged it. And I said, there's no sniper that I've ever, all snipers actually say that they never calculate for that. And it's like, oh, you're right. Actually, the consensus is that they don't calculate for it. And I said, then why did you give it to me? So, the only explanation the AI can gather from the internet are things that are easily debunkable. And then it said stellar observations are proof. And I said, but they'd be the same with a geocentric world, Earth. And it said, oh, you're actually correct. Yeah, stellar observations alone do not definitively distinguish between a rotating Earth and a geocentric model with moving luminaries. So that's and AI continues, that's a crucial point in history of astronomy and a key reason why the debate persisted for so long. And then after I continued challenging AI, it eventually admitted that what it says is that you've presented a very challenging and valid point. It's true that for each piece of evidence I've offered, a counter explanation, however complex or less parsimonious, could be constructed with a stationary geocentric framework. So the only proof that AI could give me was easily said that no, that same thing could happen in a geocentric world. And but if you say that maybe the Earth isn't spinning, you're looked at as like you're like the devil or something. So let's look at the kind of the big picture rabbit hole that we've gone down. So in the 1500s, you have Copernican heliocentric model was implemented. Then the Copernican model needed gravity in order for it to work. So gravity was theorized by Newton to save the Copernican model. Then Earth was detected not to be moving. Then the theory of relativity was implemented by Einstein to save Newton's theories. And then both are off by 96%, and they need to create a post hoc explanation to save the theories. They just saying, well, and it's all based on that they can't say that Earth is center of all things because that means there's a God. Then you have dark matter that's implemented and theorized. Dark matter is being found to be falsified. So real science is being ignored to preserve the current cosmology, which is based only upon philosophical grounds that there is no creator God. I know I keep saying things over and over again. So Nikola Tesla says this, and this is exactly where we're at, and this was back in the early 1900s. It says, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. That's exactly where we are today. It's imagination on a chalkboard with fancy equations, and none of it is provable, and none of it is testable. So this is what Copernicus said, even back then. He said, it is not necessary that hypotheses be true or even probable. It is sufficient that they lead to results of calculation which agree with calculation. So he's saying, you just have to make the math work out. It doesn't matter if they're true or false, as long as you have the math. You just make the math work, and then we'll take it. It doesn't even have to be true, he says. Just make the math work. Albert Einstein says, the exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. Maybe he knew something. Having giant holes in the model is acceptable as long as you can say it explained things without God. That's where we're at. So MIT professor Walter Lewin says, it is really electrical forces that hold our world together. So he's saying that you don't even really count on gravity until you get to the cosmological, or like the orbits in the outer space. It's just all about orbits. So, research the electric universe versus the gravitational universe. Gravity might not be exactly what we think it is, because really the only time, I don't know. Obviously something happens, but, is it this force that we can't prove? The bending of space-time? Or is it electricity, electromagnetism, density, and buoyancy that makes everything happen? So you have this thing called the three-body problem. So in physics, the three-body problem refers to the challenge of calculating the future motions of three celestial bodies like planets or stars, or even the sun, moon, and the earth, that are all gravitationally interacting with each other. So in a computer program, you could put two balls next to each other, plug in the math, and you can get them to orbit. Using our current understanding of gravity, when you put a third body in there, it just starts going haywire. There's no way to predict any of its movement, and it goes all random and wacky. There's no orbits. So there's no way to make this happen mathematically and even simulate it with advanced computers. You just can't make it happen. So there are major problems with all of this. The major problem is that it just doesn't work. Mathematical and theoretical band-aids keep being applied, and that's why theory and experiments are off by 10 to the 120th power, as stated by Michio Kaku. Whereas astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson would say, when it comes to the universe, we are 96% stupid. Yet we take everything they say as gospel truth, and we will discount Scripture, and we'll twist Scripture to try to fit this model that's off by 10 to the 120th power. And you got to think, like, what do you really believe? So we're just going to shift gears really quick and look at, so using strictly navigational data that's based on geometry, one can calculate the perspective elevation of the sun. Not saying that's exactly where it is, but where do we perceive it at when we triangulate it? So at high noon, the perspective elevation is at 3,107 miles above sea level. I'm not saying that's where it's at, but that's where we perceive it. Okay, this would place it somewhere in the Van Allen radiation belts, if it were smaller and more local to Earth. Another thing with navigational data here, and the sun's perspective position when using navigational data seems to be mirrored at the equator, depending on the observer's position, due to the due to a potential crystalline firmament. So if this is a bird's eye view looking down on the top of the Earth, and then you calculate like these different positions based on navigational data. So this gets a little complicated to understand. I was listening to like a 3-hour lecture on it, but essentially what it's saying is no matter where your location on Earth, the sun will appear to rise and fall at your point of view which is different for everyone at all locations at Earth, but the perspective elevation is always the same. So for instance, if you're here, right here in the middle, so let me say that again. If you're at this spot right here, like let's say 30 degrees latitude, and you're at this spot here, negative 30 degrees latitude, you can see the sun at the same position. But as it starts to go down, if you're over here on the top of the screen, you're going to see the sun right here at your perspective elevation. And then if you're down here at this spot, you're going to see the sun right here at its perspective elevation. So there's a mirroring effect that happens at the equator right here, no matter where your position is. So then you say, so I plugged this into AI as well, and I said, hey, let's assume that there's a crystalline firmament at some elevation within 20,000 miles above Earth's surface, and if it's made out of these materials, I asked if this would be possible, and it said yes. I mean, I don't, that's not the be all end all. What I'm saying is that it's at least theoretically possible that the sun's position could look different based on a crystalline firmament. So also using double triangulation, a biblical firmament researcher, so this is a guy that believes in the biblical firmament, this is what he says, found that according to our perspective in the navigational data from like databases from navigation, the sun and the moon are both about 30 miles in diameter. So this is just what he said. This is based on calculating double triangulation methods from using navigational, like real navigational data from archives. So this is his view here, and he also believes in like multiple firmaments and that the firmament is up to 500 miles of elevation at its North Pole zenith. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know any of this, but I just thought it was interesting to bring up in this. But he also reports that he doesn't know and believes that we can never know the actual heights of certain things. This is just his guess based on navigational data. I'm more prone to believe that, based on my research, that it's a lot farther up than that. But we'll see. I don't know. Maybe it is. That's definitely above low Earth orbit, and we'll talk about that as well. So the navigational data does show kind of how a crystalline firmament could show visual anomalies seen at the poles, with the sun near in the firmament and not 93 million miles away. And then sun rays hitting Antarctica at an angle as seen in this document from Freedom of Information Act. I don't know why it was hidden, but sun rays hitting Antarctica at an angle can be replicated in both a geocentric model with a smaller sun and a heliocentric model with a further away sun based on the angle of the rays. So, nothing that happens at the poles can be necessarily proven one way or the other with a geocentric or a heliocentric world. So, if there is a crystalline firmament, you think about that it would have to be kind of a container, right? It would kind of contain Earth. So think about these things. These are what we believe, right? A pressurized atmosphere. So our atmosphere is pressurized, but it's sitting next to a vacuum of space. Or is it more probable that you have a pressurized atmosphere in a container, a crystalline container? A water cycle without a container. So Earth is the only example of that you can think of. I know we don't have a lot of other ways we can experiment with that, but in Josephus, Book 1, Chapter 130, it says, of his work states that heaven was a place over the world and God placed a crystalline firmament around it for moisture, rain, and dews. So weather without a container next to a vacuum, a global atmospheric electrical circuit without a container and next to a vacuum. So Earth is the only instance in which these processes don't need a container are on Earth. And this can't be replicated in any other instance. And it's one of those things like, well, you can't prove it, but which one seems like more probable? Pressurized gas next to a vacuum with no container, or pressurized gas with a container? And the thin ionosphere is the roof of the electrical current in the global atmospheric electrical circuit. So it's like, okay, maybe that's an explanation for it, but it's also, think of when you open a can of pop. I mean, how are you going to have pressurized gas without something to contain it? Now, this is the big one, but NASA, okay? But NASA. This is big here. NASA's key pioneers and contributors were Jack Parsons, who was an occultist and Satanist, and he apparently summoned demons in the desert, which coincidentally coincides with the beginning of our alien phenomena. And Werner von Braun, who was a Nazi rocket scientist with inspiration from Walt Disney, L. Ron Hubbard, the guy who founded Scientology, and Aleister Crowley, an infamous Satanist. So I've personally watched probably over 2 hours for sure of NASA faking things, and not just like guessing that they're faking things. We're talking about invisible wires, or I'm sorry, visible wires. You can actually see the wires pulling them up when they're supposed to be floating in space. They're suspending astronauts, getting tangled in them. Visual glitches with green screens. So you see like things going through people's hands. You see them grabbing something that's not there and trying to put it on their head. I mean, it's like America's Funniest Home Videos with some of this stuff. You see glitches in green screens happening, visual glitches, things falling due to gravity while they're supposed to be weightless. From falling in orbit. And they say, well, it's just weak gravity. It's not that there isn't gravity, and it's almost like they're just like in a they're falling. So like when you do the weightlessness thing in like an airplane, it's because it's falling and you're just kind of hovering there. And they said, oh, we drop things because there's gravity pockets. And it's like, yeah, but everything else was floating. And then that one thing drops out of your hand, and then everyone looks up like, oh crap. You know what I mean? It's like you see overlaid screens and pictures that can be filtered through programs to show their layering. So when you see things like the moon, um, or when you see the Earth and the astronaut on the moon, and you see the Earth behind there, you put that through a couple filters, you see a big rectangle box around the Earth. It's like it's messed with. The photos, it's not just a picture; it's messed with. You see the layering there. You see different things that look like bubbles being visible in space, like when they're doing spacewalks. And you know that they train inside a swimming pool. And then there's even pictures when they're walking around there. You see the swimming, or the ISS that's in the giant swimming pool in Texas. You see monitors that have a green screen behind it. It's like, why would you put a green screen behind your ISS training in the swimming pool? Why would you put something behind there? I've seen video where you see literally a scuba dive when they're in space, but you see a scuba diver in the reflection of one of the helmets with a photographer or a video camera. So when you see like launching a satellite, these are back like some of their videos from like the 80s. You see them launching a satellite, and then kind of in the background, when you put filters through it, you can see someone's face there, like it's a miniature model against the blackness. You see someone's face kind of flash across the screen. There's many inconsistencies over the years, but as CGI and technology improve. So once it's like back when you watched a movie when you were a kid and you saw like the crappy animation, you thought it looked pretty real. And then now when you go back 20 years later and watch, you're like, oh my gosh, that's so fake looking, because now you've seen better. So what happens is they get caught doing these things, people call it out, and then they scrub the video. They get rid of the video. Some of them they try to give an explanation for, which is not great, and some they don't. I mean, it's so much fakery and tomfoolery, and it's like, why would you do that? But please don't take my word for it. Now I will tell you, it is relatively impossible to find these things. Now people have archived them, but it's like almost impossible. So there's this guy Igor Volk. He's a Soviet cosmonaut, 1937 to 2017. He said this during an interview. He said, "We haven't been to space. If someone claims that we have been, it's not true. It's not the truth." Was he fooling? His interviewer said no, but I don't know. Now, A fair argument could be that they're only faking it because it's too expensive to actually film in space, and they just want to make the illusion of it. So, say, oh, there really is people doing work at the ISS. However, we can't. It's just too expensive to fly people up there and do all this different stuff and video record. So we're just gonna fake it. And that's a fair argument. I guess that's possible. They just wanted to make the illusion of it. However, then I don't know. You're just creating controversy. And then the other big one, it says, but we went to the moon. Now, I'm going to be very opinionated on this. No, we didn't. Okay. I don't have time to get into detail, but that would take way too long. But I want you to check out the documentaries. This should do enough for you. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon, and Astronauts Gone Wild, both by Bart Sabro. Okay. Just a couple things to bring up with it. NASA claims to have taped over the original footage of the moon landing due to budget. Okay, due to their budget, they had to tape over their film to tape other stuff. The greatest achievement of all humanity got taped over, the original footage, because we didn't have enough money, so we had to start taping over all of our stuff. NASA also doesn't have any of the telemetry data from the missions. They lost it. The most significant achievement of mankind, and they lost the telemetry data. Not there. Oh, well, we lost it. And why haven't we gone back? It's a big question. They say, well, there's no need to. Why do we need to go there? So they give two reasons. One, budget. They say it's budget. The other one, it says they destroyed the technology to go back. So one of the astronauts is quoted as saying, you can find this video, it says, we would go back in a nanosecond, but we destroyed the technology, and it's too hard to build it back. It's too hard to build it back. Let's explore those two reasons. So their budget is $25 billion a year recently. In 1969, it was $4 million, and accounting for inflation, that would be about $35 million in today's dollars. So the budget is 714 times more than it was when we went to the moon. So are you going to say that it's a budgetary concern? Really? You couldn't buy any more film making $35 million in 1969? 25 billion tax dollars a year is what they get. 25 billion. That's millions of dollars a day of tax dollars. That's not an excuse. It can't be the budget. It can't be the budget. And they say the technology, we destroyed it. You have exponentially more computing power in your cell phone than they did during all the moon missions. Technology has exponentially advanced. I mean, we're talking to computers now and AI. But somehow, we had far more technology for the moon mission, and we've regressed as far as space exploration. All technology is skyrocketing, but we go backwards when it talks about space exploration. In retrospect, the materials that they used and that would not be able to survive in space, let alone the Van Allen radiation belts. Now, you're not going to be able to Google this. I'm telling you, you will not be able to do this. All you're going to find is why we did go to the moon, and those don't hold any weight. I'm just not buying it. You can if you want. These are multiple reasons why I don't have time. This would be a whole nother 12-part series of why, but I don't think it happened. Let's talk about low Earth orbit. So one of NASA's new objectives is trying to leave low Earth orbit. Really? We went to the moon 50 years ago. But now we're trying to leave low Earth orbit. Okay. So low Earth orbit is anywhere from 99 miles to 1,245 miles in altitude. So we usually kind of hover around, allegedly, I don't know, I haven't been there, but the space station is somewhere around 100 to 200 miles in altitude away from the Earth. So what is the reason what's their main issue of leaving low Earth orbit? Well, the reason is the Van Allen radiation belts. Van Allen belts. The only time we have been past these Van Allen belts is during the moon missions. Imagine that. We can't get past them now. The only time we ever been past them is during the moon missions. That may or may have not have happened. And they're located roughly 620 to 6,000 miles in altitude from Earth's surface. So there's a big kind of gap there. It was detected in 1958 by probes. Now for our next session, I want you to remember this date, 1958. So Google AI says, the Van Allen belts are often described as having a nearly impenetrable barrier due to a sharp inner edge within the outer belt. And this guy, Professor Daniel Baker from the University of Colorado's Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics claims, but speaking of the Van Allen radiation belts, it's almost like these electrons are running into a glass wall in space. That's an interesting way to phrase that, isn't it? NASA will say that there are a problem for space travel, but then they'll turn around and say that they aren't a problem for space travel. Or at least they weren't a problem for space travel during all the moon missions. So when you say, how did the astronauts get past the Van Allen belts? They're like, oh, well, they went really fast and they went through the thin layer and it wasn't an issue. It's like, well, why don't you do that now then? You could do that 50 years ago. Why can't you do it now? They won't. They can't. Radiation. So the Van Allen radiation belts. We're going to take just a real quick deviation here and talk about this, talk about radiation. So radiation, by definition, is the emission of energy as electromagnetic waves or moving subatomic particles, especially high energy particles, which cause ionization. So essentially, ionizing radiation is just very high energy. So that's all that is. So if the Van Allen belts are the edge of where we can explore, could these coincide with the firmament? Possibly. I'm just bringing up conjectures and speculation. So, and if God is right past that firmament, let's just say, for kicks and giggles, are we just detecting his high energy? It's an interesting thought thing. So there's a church in Ethiopia that is claiming to protect the Ark of the Covenant, and a single monk will guard the Ark in the chapel in which it is kept, and they all either die of radiation poisoning or go blind or something to that effect. Now, we don't know if that's actually the Ark, but let's just pretend that it is the Ark. So now you have the Ark of the Covenant, almost like acting like it has radiation emanating from it. And what did the Ark of the Covenant hold? It held God's presence, right? That's interesting as well. So everywhere there's potentially we could see God's presence, we see radiation, or could be the effects of radiation. So 1 Samuel 5:9. So it was after they had carried it away, talking about the Philistines, that the hand of the Lord was against the city and with a very great destruction, and he struck the men of the city, both great and small, and tumors broke out of them. 1 Samuel 5:11 and 12. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of God of Israel and let it go back to its own place, so that it does not kill us and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there, and the men who did not die were stricken with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. 1 Samuel 6:19. Then he struck the men of Beth Shemesh, because they had looked into the ark of the Lord. He struck 50,070 men of the people, and the people lamented because the Lord had struck the people with a great slaughter. So could it be that unless protected by God, or something to that effect, could the ark, which is to harness God's presence, be a literal high energy emitting artifact that could kill anyone near it or even give them radiation poisoning or tumors? It just kind of seems that way, doesn't it? So radiation and priestly garments. So I was reading Exodus the other day and I was looking and I'm like, this is interesting. So remember that God or Yahweh told Moses, he says, make sure you do everything exactly like I asked you to do. Talking about building of the tabernacle, all these different rules. So I'd be interested to see how the combination of the materials of the priestly sacred garments, the chest piece, the ephod, the robe, the tunic, the turban, the sash, would potentially shield radiation. So you see verbiage like the chest plate will always be over his heart, and make sure it doesn't tear, and if he wears it, he will not die, and You have to warn on his forehead so he does not incur guilt, and wear it like this so they will not incur guilt and die. It's like, why would you, like, why would God have these, like, rules where it's like, if you don't just wear this piece of clothing exactly right, you're going to die and incur guilt? And it's like, that doesn't sound like, why would God do something like that? But then if you think of it this way, it's like, okay, maybe all those gems and jewels and all that, he says, make sure that the gold is just right on this, and it has to be right here, and that piece of metal has to be right over his forehead, and make sure that it's spaced out evenly like this, and it has to be gold here, and it has to be this color, and it has to be this, or else he's gonna die. And it's like, what, like, I don't wear the right clothes and I'm gonna die? But if you think of it this way, maybe there's a specific reason for that. So the garments also must be preserved for future generations. Cleansing rituals and very specific materials and positionings of these things in the holy place. So why? Why under the threat of death? Why do they have to do these certain things? The only thing that would have been visible on them, like not covered, would have been their face. But then before they get this oil combination poured over their head, and that would run down their face too. Like, is this special oil combination of stuff like block radiation? Like, are these arbitrary rules, or are they very necessary rules to save them? So a really good read for you. It's very scientific and stuff, and it's a long read. But if you Google what's called God's nuclear touch, I came to this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to Google this. Has anyone else come to this conclusion? And this guy has. And man, there are some very interesting theories on odd rituals, rules, and regulations that could relate to God's presence literally being nuclear, high ionized, radiating energy. And he says, okay, you want my presence to be here? You got to do some very specific things to make sure that you can survive being somewhat in my presence. Even the foods that they ate, their cleansing rituals, and even they did different stuff with their food that could almost act as if the radiation was acting like a microwave and like killing bacteria and stuff. They had a lot of weird stuff that we kind of read over. But remember, everything is on purpose in the Bible. So it's just cool. I want you to go look up God's Nuclear Touch. I think you'll enjoy it. It's a really interesting read, or just at least skim through it and see what it has to say. Sorry, I know this one was a little bit longer. I could have included a lot more there, but I wanted to just include some major stuff. But you've made it this far. I implore you to finish out the series. You have one more left. And take heart, because Jesus has overcome the world, regardless of what it looks like and if we're moving or not. And our last session will be about the deception of the world, and we'll wrap up the final thoughts and get to the heart of the deeper meaning of all of this. It's not just about to prove something right or to prove something wrong. All these theories in here could be incorrect. They could be correct. There could be a mixture of truth and some things are right, some things are wrong. It doesn't matter, because when we get to the deeper meaning of all this stuff, it's just with whichever one you believe, doesn't matter. But anyways, see you in the last video.